At my son's wedding, I noticed something strange before anyone else did. My name wasn't missing. It was worse than that. It was there, neatly printed in elegant calligraphy, placed at a small round table near the back of the reception hall. But instead of a chair behind it, there was a silver trash can. Polished. Empty. Positioned carefully where I was supposed to sit. For a moment, I simply stood there. The ballroom at the Grand Lakeside Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers. White roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor. Guests in tailored suits and silk dresses laughed over champagne flutes. It was a beautiful wedding. My son Daniel looked handsome in his tuxedo. 42 years ago, I held him in my arms in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and hope. Now he stood tall at the altar, smiling at the woman he had chosen to build his life with. I had told myself this day would be one of my proudest. I had written the largest check of my life to make sure it was. The venue alone cost more than my first house back in 1983. I took a slow breath and looked again at the trash can. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't misplaced. It had been positioned. I heard a soft laugh behind me. "Oh, Linda," my daughter-in-law's sister said lightly, touching my elbow. "Don't look so serious. It's just a joke." A joke. I turned my head slowly. Across the room, my daughter-in-law, Brianna, was adjusting the lace sleeve of her wedding gown. She caught my eye. Her lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. Almost. Daniel stood beside her. He glanced toward me, just briefly, then looked away. "It's just a joke," someone repeated. "Don't be so dramatic." The words floated toward me like confetti, harmless on the surface, sharp underneath. I didn't respond. I didn't demand an explanation. I didn't ask for a chair. Instead, I picked up my clutch, adjusted the pearl bracelet Daniel had given me for Mother's Day 10 years ago, and said quietly, "Of course." I wouldn't want to ruin the mood. I moved to an empty seat at a distant table near the catering station. From there, I had a perfect view of everything. The cake, 5 tiers, imported sugar flowers. The custom ice sculpture. The open bar I insisted on upgrading. The guests, many of whom I didn't recognize, enjoying the evening I had helped fund. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. The trash can remained where my seat had been. Some guests noticed. A few whispered. Most pretended not to see it. Humiliation doesn't need volume. It only needs placement. As the ceremony began, I watched my son recite vows about loyalty, about respect, about family. His voice was steady, confident. I remembered the night he had a fever at age 6 and refused to sleep unless I held his hand. I remembered working double shifts at the hospital after his father passed, just so Daniel could attend college without loans. I remembered selling my wedding ring to help him start his first business. I had never once asked for repayment. Only a seat at his table. When the officiant announced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause. I clapped too, softly. Later, during cocktail hour, I overheard someone near the bar. "Who's the older woman sitting alone?" "I think that's the groom's mom." "Oh." A pause. "And the trash can?" A short laugh. "Family humor, I guess." Family humor. I sipped my sparkling water. I don't drink anymore. I learned long ago that clarity is more powerful than comfort. Brianna approached me once during the evening. Her dress shimmered under the lights. "Everything okay?" she asked sweetly. "Beautiful wedding," I replied. She tilted her head slightly. "I knew you'd understand. We didn't want anything too stiff tonight. We're a modern couple." "Modern?" "Yes," I said. "I can see that." Daniel never addressed the chair. He never addressed the trash can. He never addressed me. When it was time for speeches, I noticed something else. My name was not on the program. The mother of the groom traditionally says a few words. Instead, Brianna's father took the microphone. He thanked both families, then proceeded to speak for 15 minutes about Brianna's childhood, her dreams, her accomplishments. Daniel stood beside him, smiling. No one invited me to speak. No one acknowledged the woman who had written the checks. I felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. Not anger. Something colder. Recognition. When the dancing began, I quietly slipped outside to the terrace overlooking the lake. The October air was crisp. The moon reflected on the water like a polished coin. I allowed myself one long breath. They thought it was harmless. They thought it was funny. They thought I would swallow it the way I had swallowed every small slight over the past 5 years. Being excluded from dress fittings. Not being told about the engagement party until 2 days before. Being introduced to friends as Daniel's mom instead of by my name. Small things. Always small things. But small things, when placed deliberately, build a pattern. And patterns reveal intent. I checked my phone. A message from my attorney sat unread from earlier that week. I had scheduled a routine estate review months ago. Just precautionary. At 71, one learns to keep paperwork in order. I looked back through the ballroom windows. Brianna was laughing. Daniel had his arm around her waist. The trash can was gone now. Someone must have removed it. Interesting. I smiled faintly. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I understood something they did not. Humiliation is a choice. So is access. And access to homes, to accounts, to inheritances, to future grandchildren's college funds is never guaranteed. I walked back inside. I congratulated the newlyweds. I kissed my son on the cheek. I'm proud of you, I said. He looked relieved. Relief is a fragile emotion. As the night ended and guests gathered their coats, Brianna hugged me tightly for the first time that evening. Thank you for everything, she whispered. You're welcome, I replied calmly. I meant it. For everything. Including the lesson. Because the next morning, while they were boarding their honeymoon flight to Santorini, I would be sitting in a quiet leather chair across from my attorney. And I would be making adjustments. Not dramatic ones. Just precise ones. They replaced my seat with a trash can. I decided to replace something too. And unlike their joke, mine would be permanent. That morning, I woke up before my alarm. Weddings do that to mothers. I stood in my bedroom for a moment, looking at the navy blue dress hanging on the closet door. I had chosen it months ago. Simple, elegant, long sleeves, age-appropriate, as Brianna had gently suggested. I think something modest would photograph better, she had said. I agreed. I always agreed. I had my hair done at 9. The stylist pinned it softly at the nape of my neck and told me I looked radiant. Your son is lucky to have you, she said. I smiled. Daniel used to sit at the kitchen table while I packed his school lunches. Peanut butter sandwiches cut into perfect triangles. Apple slices brushed with lemon so they wouldn't brown. That morning, as I applied my lipstick, I remembered those small hands reaching for mine in parking lots. He used to look for me in every room. Now I was learning how to disappear quietly in one. I arrived at the hotel early. Old habit. When you spend decades making sure everything runs smoothly, punctuality becomes instinct. The event coordinator recognized me immediately. Oh, Mrs. Carter, everything turned out beautifully. Your contribution really made a difference. Contribution. That word again. I nodded politely and walked through the ballroom before guests arrived. The centerpieces were lush. The lighting warm. The dance floor polished to a mirror shine. I paused at the head table. 2 ornate chairs for the bride and groom. To the right, Brianna's parents. To the left, empty space. I assumed they were still setting up. I didn't ask. I had already written the check for the final vendor balance 3 days earlier. $68,000. Paid in full. Daniel had called me the night before. Mom, thank you again. I know it's a lot. It's your wedding, I told him. It should be everything you want. I meant that. I have never been a woman who measures love in dollars. But I do notice where I'm placed. By the time guests began arriving, the room was glowing. Laughter echoed off the walls. Champagne glasses clinked. I remember thinking how proud Daniel's father would have been. We buried him 12 years ago. I wore black for a year after that. Not because anyone asked me to. Because grief changes color perception. When Daniel introduced me to Brianna 5 years ago, I promised myself I would not be the difficult mother-in-law. I would be supportive, modern, flexible. And so I was. Dress fittings I wasn't invited to. Cake tasting scheduled without me. Family photos where I stood at the edge instead of the center. Small things. I told myself not to read into them. That morning, standing in that ballroom, I still believed the day would hold dignity. I truly did. I had no idea that by evening, my place would be symbolized by something disposable. And yet, if I'm honest, the signs had been there long before the trash can appeared. I just chose not to see them. It wasn't the trash can alone that unsettled me. It was what came after. During dinner service, I noticed something else. The seating chart had been printed on a large ivory board near the entrance. Gold lettering. Elegant script. Under immediate family, Brianna's parents were listed first. Then her sister, her brother-in-law, then distant cousins from her side. My name appeared under additional guests. Additional. I stared at the word for a long moment. No one around me seemed surprised. A few people avoided eye contact. Others offered polite smiles, the kind given to someone who is technically included, but not truly considered. Halfway through the main course, I excused myself to the restroom. Not because I needed to, but because sometimes a closed door helps you breathe. As I walked down the hallway, I heard two women speaking in hushed tones near the coat check. I heard they didn't even want her involved in the planning. Well, you know how Brianna feels. A pause. She thinks Linda still controls everything. Controls everything. I stopped walking. I have spent the last decade trying to step back, trying to let Daniel build his own life. I sold the family home after his father passed, downsized to a 2-bedroom condo, transferred the business shares to him 5 years ago. Control was never my goal. Stability was. When I returned to the ballroom, I noticed Daniel standing near the bar with Brianna's father. They were laughing about something. Daniel looked relaxed, comfortable. I waited for him to notice me. He didn't. There was a moment, brief but sharp, when I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't spontaneous. The trash can wasn't a last-minute prank. The seating wasn't an oversight. The speeches weren't accidental exclusions. It was coordinated, subtle, layered, quiet, designed to communicate something without saying it directly. You are not central anymore. You are optional. You are decorative at best, disposable at worst. Later in the evening, Brianna's mother approached me with a glass of champagne. We just wanted tonight to feel balanced, she said gently. You understand. Balanced. I nodded. Of course I understand balance. I've spent my entire life creating it. Working overtime so Daniel could attend private school. Taking out a second mortgage when his first startup failed. Hosting holidays so both sides of the family felt welcome. Balance has always required sacrifice. I just didn't realize that, eventually, I would become the weight that needed removing. When the photographer gathered immediate family for portraits, no one called my name at first. I stepped forward on my own. The photographer hesitated. Oh, are you? I'm his mother, I said calmly. There was a slight shuffle, an adjustment in positions. I was placed at the far edge of the frame, close enough to appear, far enough to crop. That was the moment it settled in fully. This was not about humor. It was about erasure. And erasure, when done politely, is far more dangerous than open cruelty, because it allows everyone to pretend nothing happened, except something had, and I had seen it clearly. For the first time in years, I stopped questioning my instincts. I stopped minimizing what I felt, and I began, very quietly, to remember where everything truly stands. I met Brianna 5 years ago at a Sunday dinner I hosted in my old house. She arrived 20 minutes late, not apologetic, not flustered, just composed. She brought a bottle of wine, expensive, and complimented my kitchen renovation before asking how much it had cost. At the time, I thought she was confident, modern, direct. Daniel was completely taken with her. I could see it in the way he watched her speak, the way he leaned in when she laughed. I told myself that love looks different in every generation. That night, when I served dessert, she said something small. Daniel tells me you've always handled the finances. I nodded. After his father passed, yes. She smiled politely. That must have been a lot of responsibility. It wasn't the words. It was the tone, as if responsibility and control were interchangeable. A few weeks later, Daniel called to say they were thinking about moving in together. I don't want you to worry, Mom, he said quickly. Brianna just thinks it's time I manage things more independently. Independently. I had already transferred his business shares to him the year before. Already taken my name off his car loan. Already stepped back. But suddenly, stepping back wasn't enough. I needed to disappear from the structure entirely. Over the next year, invitations became selective. Group texts replaced phone calls. Holidays shifted to her parents' home more often. When I offered to host Thanksgiving, Brianna would say gently, "We're trying to rotate traditions." Rotate. It always sounded reasonable. Reasonable things are the hardest to question. At their engagement party, Brianna introduced me to one of her friends as Daniel's mom. She used to run everything. Used to. I remember that word clearly. Used to. As if my relevance had an expiration date. Daniel didn't correct her. He rarely corrected her. Not because he was cruel. Because he was adjusting. Men in love often adjust quietly. And mothers are expected to do the same. The first real sign came during wedding planning. Brianna suggested hiring a full-service planner so no one feels overwhelmed. The planner called Brianna for every decision. Florals. Seating. Budget allocations. I received updates after contracts were signed. When I gently asked about contributing to certain choices, Brianna smiled. Oh, we didn't want to burden you. Burden. That word again. By the time we reached the rehearsal dinner, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was being repositioned. Not removed entirely. Just shifted outward. Less central. Less necessary. And repositioning, done gradually, rarely feels like an attack. It feels like evolution. Until the day comes when a trash can sit where your chair should be. And suddenly, evolution looks a lot like elimination. That night at the wedding, as I watched Daniel dance with his new wife, I realized something difficult but clarifying. This didn't start today. It started the moment I became optional. And optional, in some people's minds, eventually becomes disposable. I had simply mistaken courtesy for inclusion. That misunderstanding ended tonight. It was close to 10 when the music shifted from formal ballroom to louder, modern dance tracks. The younger guests crowded the floor. Heels came off. Jackets were loosened. Laughter grew less restrained. I remained seated near the terrace doors. That's when Eleanor approached me. She and I have known each other for nearly 20 years. Our sons played Little League together. We've shared hospital waiting rooms, PTA meetings, and too many casseroles during difficult seasons. She sat beside me without asking. You're handling this well, she said quietly. I looked at her. Handling what? She hesitated. The chair. I let a few seconds pass before answering. It wasn't a chair. Eleanor's mouth tightened. Linda, I wasn't sure whether to say anything. You don't have to. But she continued anyway. I was there at the rehearsal yesterday. Brianna was joking with her bridesmaids about symbolic seating. I thought she meant something abstract. Symbolic seating. I kept my posture straight. Eleanor lowered her voice. One of the girls asked if it was too much. Brianna said, it'll send the message without confrontation. Send the message. The words didn't surprise me. They settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling all evening. It wasn't spontaneous then, I said calmly. No, Eleanor replied. It wasn't. We sat in silence for a moment. The music thumped through the ballroom. Daniel lifted Brianna into the air while guests cheered. Eleanor placed her hand lightly over mine. I'm sorry. I nodded once. I think she believes you still hold influence, Eleanor added. Financial influence. Oh, there it was. Not control. Influence. The difference is subtle but important. Control dictates. Influence protects. I have always protected. My estate plan has not been updated since Daniel's father passed. Everything was structured simply, clearly, generously. Daniel would inherit the condo, the investment accounts, the remaining shares of the business, the educational trust for future grandchildren. It was never conditional, because I never imagined conditions would be necessary. Eleanor stood after a moment. You deserve better than that. Perhaps. But deserving and receiving are two different things. After she walked away, I remained seated, watching the dance floor. Brianna caught my eye again from across the room. This time, her expression was not playful. It was evaluative, as if she were measuring my reaction, waiting for emotion, waiting for confrontation. I gave her neither. Instead, I offered a small, composed smile. Because something had shifted now. Before, I had doubt. Now, I had confirmation. The trash can was not humor. It was strategy, a signal, a test. And in that moment, as the wedding celebration continued around me, I realized something very important. If this was about influence, then influence could be adjusted. Quietly, precisely, without drama. And I have always preferred precision over noise. The morning after the wedding, I woke up at 6. I always wake up early after important events. My mind prefers quiet when it has decisions to make. The condo was still. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains in my living room, soft and pale. I made coffee the way I always do. 1 scoop, measured exactly, no sugar. Routine is grounding. I did not cry. I did not replay the dance floor or the applause or the whispers. I replayed the wording. Symbolic seating. Send the message. Financial influence. Interesting how carefully people choose their language when they believe they are being clever. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. A photo from Daniel. He and Brianna at the airport, boarding their honeymoon flight to Santorini. Sunglasses. Smiles. Champagne in plastic cups. Thanks for everything, Mom. Love you. I stared at the message for a long moment. Love is easy to type. Respect is harder to demonstrate. I typed back. Have a wonderful trip. Safe travels. Nothing more. At 8:15, I opened my laptop. The estate review appointment had been on my calendar for weeks. A simple annual checkup, I had told myself. Responsible planning. Now it felt timely. My attorney, Mr. Kaplan, has handled my affairs for 12 years. Careful man. Methodical. He does not overreact. That is why I trust him. His office is 10 minutes from my condo. Brick building. 3rd floor. Quiet hallway that always smells faintly of paper and polished wood. When I walked in, his assistant smiled. Mrs. Carter, good to see you. Likewise. I did not mention the wedding. I did not mention the trash can. Mr. Kaplan gestured for me to sit. Anything specific you'd like to address today? He asked. Yes, I said calmly. Clarity. He waited. I would like to review beneficiary designations. And I'd like to discuss conditional structures. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Conditional in what sense? In the sense that certain forms of public conduct may reflect on suitability. He nodded slowly. He did not ask for details. That is another reason I trust him. We reviewed everything. The condo, the investment portfolio, the business residuals, the education trust that had been automatically assigned to Daniel's future children. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just structure. Legal language is remarkably neutral. It does not care about feelings. It cares about terms. Are you certain? Mr. Kaplan asked gently at one point. Yes, I replied. Certainty does not require volume. We added provisions, adjustments, reallocations. Some assets redirected to charitable foundations I have supported quietly for years, a children's literacy program, a medical scholarship fund in Daniel's father's name. Other portions placed into a discretionary trust with oversight. Clauses. Access tied to demonstrated responsibility. Influence, redefined. When the paperwork was printed, I signed with a steady hand. No shaking. No hesitation. Afterward, I walked out into the late morning sunlight, feeling something unexpected. Not revenge. Relief. Because for the first time in years, my position was no longer symbolic. It was deliberate. Daniel and Brianna were somewhere over the Atlantic by then, laughing about something trivial. They believed the message had been sent. They were right. It had. They simply misunderstood who would be receiving it. Daniel and Brianna returned on a Sunday afternoon. I knew because Daniel texted me from the driveway of their new townhouse. Back home. Jet-lagged. Want to come by for dinner this week? Dinner this week. Not we missed you. Not I've been thinking. Just logistics. I waited an hour before replying. Of course. Thursday works. When I arrived that evening, the house still smelled faintly of new paint and travel-sized shampoo. Suitcases sat half unpacked near the staircase. Brianna wore linen pants and a loose sweater, barefoot on the hardwood floor. She hugged me lightly. How was your week? She asked. Productive, I said. Daniel poured wine for everyone except me. You still doing that no alcohol thing? He asked casually. Yes. He nodded. Good for you. Small talk filled the space while dinner cooked. Travel stories. Santorini sunsets. The infinity pool overlooking the Aegean Sea. I listened. I've always been a good listener. At one point, Brianna mentioned the thank you notes. We're finalizing everything, she said. Just making sure contributions are documented correctly. Contributions. There it was again. I'm sure you are, I replied. Dinner was pleasant enough. Roasted chicken, green beans, a salad with too much lemon. After plates were cleared, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Mom, quick question, he said. Brianna and I were reviewing some long-term plans. Long-term. We realized we should probably talk about estate coordination at some point. Just so everything's streamlined. Streamlined. I folded my napkin neatly. In what sense? I asked. Well, he continued carefully. You know, making sure assets don't get complicated down the road. Probate can be messy. Messy. I noticed Brianna watching me closely. Evaluating. Waiting. I smiled gently. That's thoughtful of you, I said. Actually, I had a review recently. Daniel blinked. Oh, yes. Everything is updated. A brief pause. Updated how? Brianna asked lightly. In a way that reflects current circumstances. Silence settled for just a second too long. Daniel shifted in his seat. Is everything okay? Everything is clear, I answered. Clarity unsettles people when they expected vagueness. Brianna picked up her water glass, but didn't drink. I just think families should be transparent, she added. I agree, I said calmly. Daniel attempted a smile. Well, That's good then. The subject moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. Subtle, but real. After dessert, Daniel walked me to my car. The porch light cast a soft glow over the driveway. Mom, he said, lowering his voice. You know we were kidding at the wedding, right? I looked at him. Were you? He hesitated. It wasn't meant to be a thing. I know, I replied evenly. It was symbolic. His expression shifted. How did you? I listened, I said gently. He swallowed. It wasn't Brianna's idea entirely. Interesting. I'm sure it wasn't, I answered. Because accountability shared is accountability diluted. He looked uneasy now. You're not upset, are you? Upset is loud. I'm adjusted, I said. He didn't understand the difference. And he didn't yet realize that adjustments, once made, are rarely reversed. I drove home slowly that night. The air was cooler than it had been 2 weeks earlier. Change has a temperature. And something in that house had just dropped a few degrees. It happened 3 weeks later. Not during a confrontation. Not during a dramatic phone call. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was organizing paperwork at my dining table when my phone rang. It was Daniel. Hey, Mom, he said, voice slightly tighter than usual. Quick question. Yes. Did something change with the education trust? There it was. Calmly. Directly. Yes, I said. A pause. Changed how? It's been restructured, I replied. Oversight added. Disbursements are conditional. Another pause. Conditional on what? On maturity, stability, and public conduct that reflects well on the family. Silence stretched across the line. Public conduct, he repeated slowly. Yes. That feels extreme. Extreme. I almost smiled. A trash can at a wedding felt intentional, I said evenly. He exhaled. Mom, we said we were sorry. You said it was a joke. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed. It isn't. His tone shifted from confusion to something closer to frustration. Brianna thinks this is punitive. Is it? I asked. Another silence. We were just trying to set boundaries. He said finally. Boundaries. That's admirable, I replied. So am I. The truth is, nothing had been taken away completely. The trust still existed. The future grandchildren would still be supported. But access was no longer automatic. It required accountability. I ended the call politely. Daniel, I added before hanging up. Symbolism matters. That evening, Brianna called. Her voice was measured. I just want to understand, she said. Are we being punished for a misunderstanding? Misunderstandings are accidental, I replied. Yours was discussed in advance. She didn't deny it. That doesn't mean we don't respect you, she said. Respect rarely needs explanation. I'm glad to hear that, I answered. You've changed, she added quietly. No, I said. I've clarified. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat by the window. The sunset painted the sky in muted oranges and soft purples. Peaceful. I did not feel victorious. I felt balanced. They wanted to redefine my position in their lives. They did. And I accepted it. I am no longer central. I am no longer automatic. I am conditional. And conditions, when applied carefully, tend to encourage better behavior. A few days later, Daniel texted again. Can we have dinner? Just the three of us. Not to coordinate. Not to streamline. To talk. Symbolism, it turns out, travels both ways. And sometimes, the quietest adjustments echo the loudest. We met the following Thursday. Same townhouse. Same dining table. But the atmosphere felt different this time. Measured. Daniel opened the door before I rang the bell. Thanks for coming, he said quietly. I was invited, I replied. Brianna had set the table carefully. Linen napkins. Real candles. No symbolism this time. We sat. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, we need to talk about what's been happening. I agree, I said. Brianna folded her hands in front of her plate. We never meant to humiliate you, she began. The wedding was stressful. Emotions were high. I let her finish. But you discussed it in advance, I said calmly. It was planned. She held my gaze this time. Yes, she admitted. We thought it might send a message. There it was again. A message. What message? I asked. Daniel stepped in. That we're starting our own life. That we're not dependent. Dependent. I transferred your business shares 5 years ago, I reminded him gently. You've been independent for quite some time. He looked down. It didn't feel that way, he said. That answer was honest. And honesty, even when late, has value. Brianna leaned forward slightly. We felt like you still had influence over everything. Financially, emotionally. We wanted to establish boundaries. Boundaries. I understand boundaries, I said. But humiliation is not a boundary. It's a strategy. Silence. The candles flickered between us. Daniel's voice softened. Did you change the trust because you don't trust us? No, I answered. I changed it because I trust patterns. They both looked confused. You repositioned me at your wedding. I continued evenly. Publicly. Deliberately. That demonstrated a willingness to use symbolism to communicate power. No raised voice. No anger. Just facts. And? Brianna asked. And financial access is also a form of power, I replied. So I clarified mine. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly. You think we're manipulative, he said. I think you're learning how to negotiate influence, I corrected. Brianna's composure wavered for the first time. We didn't expect this reaction. That's because you expected silence. Another pause. Daniel looked at me differently now. Not as someone to dismiss, but as someone to consider. We never wanted to lose you, he said quietly. You haven't, I replied. Then why does this feel like distance? Because it is, I said gently. Respect requires space when it has been mishandled. The room was very still. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't threatening. I was adjusting. And adjustments create new dynamics. After dinner, Daniel walked me to the door again. This time, he didn't ask if I was upset. He said something else. I didn't realize how much that seat meant. It wasn't the seat, I said. It was the message. He nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain in a way that wasn't defensive. And that uncertainty told me something important. The balance had shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, but clearly. They had sent a message at their wedding. Now they were finally hearing mine. The changes didn't happen overnight. They happened in increments. The following Sunday, Daniel called. Not a text. A call. Just checking in, he said. He hadn't just checked in months. We spoke for 20 minutes. Nothing dramatic. Weather. Work. A new client he was negotiating with. But he listened differently. There were pauses. Now, not awkward ones. Reflective ones. A week later, Brianna sent me a message. Would you like to come to brunch next Saturday? Just family. Just family. The phrase felt intentional. I accepted. When I arrived, there was a seat already set for me at the dining table. Centered. Not exaggerated. Not ceremonial. Just appropriate. No one mentioned the wedding. No one referenced the trust. But something had recalibrated. Brianna asked my opinion about a potential home renovation. Not performatively. Genuinely. I answered carefully, without overstepping. Influence does not need to dominate to exist. It only needs acknowledgement. Over the next month, small behaviors shifted. Daniel began updating me before major decisions rather than after. Brianna included me in conversations about future plans, cautiously at first, then more naturally. One evening, she said something unexpected. We didn't realize how it felt from your side. That was as close to an apology as she could manage. I know, I replied. Because sometimes people don't recognize harm until consequences introduce clarity. The trust adjustments remained in place. I did not reverse them. Conditions were not punishment. They were structure. Structure encourages mindfulness. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by my condo unannounced. He stood in my kitchen, looking around at the framed photographs, his childhood baseball uniform, his college graduation, a picture of him and his father fishing by Lake Michigan. I don't want things to feel transactional between us, he said quietly. They don't, I answered. They feel defined. Defined. That word settled better than controlled. Better than independent. Defined relationships have edges. Edges prevent erosion. A few days later, Brianna surprised me. She asked if I would like to join them when they met with a financial planner about long-term investments. Not because they needed my money, because they wanted my perspective. That invitation mattered more than any public apology would have. Respect, once reintroduced, changes posture. And posture changes dynamics. I did not celebrate these shifts. I observed them. Carefully. Because patterns form over time. And so does character. The wedding night had been symbolic. So was the dinner conversation. So were these small recalibrations. They had attempted to reposition me. In response, I clarified my position. Now, for the first time in years, I felt neither peripheral nor overpowering. I felt balanced. And balance, when established deliberately, tends to last longer than dominance ever could. It was Early December when I realized something had truly changed. Daniel called one evening, his voice quieter than usual. "Mom, can I come by?" There was no agenda in his tone. No planning language. No strategic phrasing. "Of course," I said. He arrived 20 minutes later, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly tense. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where he used to do homework while I balanced checkbooks beside him. "I've been thinking," he began. I waited. That night, at the wedding, I thought we were being clever, setting a tone. He paused. But I didn't consider what it would cost. Cost. Now he understood the word. "It cost trust," he continued. "Not money. Trust." I didn't rush to comfort him. Trust, once shaken, needs silence more than reassurance. "I didn't want to compete with you," he added. "I think I was trying to prove something." "To whom?" I asked gently. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "To myself." That answer mattered. Because insecurity explains behavior more honestly than arrogance ever does. "I don't want you at the edge of my life," he said quietly. "You moved me there," I replied. He nodded. "I know." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I hadn't heard in years. "What would make it right? Not what do you want? Not what will you give? What would make it right?" I looked at my son, the same boy who once scraped his knee and came running to me for bandages. "Consistency," I said. "Not gestures." He nodded again. That night, he stayed for tea. We talked about his father. About the early days when Daniel struggled to find his footing after college. He listened without defensiveness. When he left, he hugged me longer than usual. Not out of obligation. Out of recognition. A week later, Brianna called. "I know I haven't handled everything perfectly," she said carefully. "But I don't want distance to be our legacy." Legacy. Interesting word choice. "I don't either," I replied. She hesitated before adding, "You've always protected Daniel. I see that more clearly now." That acknowledgement was enough. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just clear. The trust remained structured. The boundaries remained defined. But the tension has softened. Because respect, once reestablished, reduces the need for correction. That's when I understood something important. This was never about punishment. It was about recalibration. They tested symbolism. I responded with structure. And structure has a way of restoring balance without raising its voice. For the first time since the wedding, I no longer felt like a guest in my own family. I felt positioned. Not central. Not peripheral. Just appropriately placed. And that, at 71, is more than enough. A few months after the wedding, Daniel and Brianna hosted their first holiday dinner as a married couple. Thanksgiving. They insisted I arrive early. When I walked into the townhouse, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Soft music played in the background. The table was already set. Daniel met me at the door. "Mom," he said, taking my coat. "I want you to see something." He led me into the dining room. There, at the center of the table, not exaggerated, not ceremonial, was a place card. Linda Carter. No jokes. No symbolism. Just my name. A chair stood behind it. Solid. Intentional. Brianna stepped forward from the kitchen. "We thought you should sit here," she said. No explanation followed. None was needed. I ran my fingers lightly over the edge of the table. Wood. Stable. Real. Symbolism matters. So does correction. During dinner, Daniel asked me to say grace. Not because tradition demanded it, but because he wanted me to. I kept it simple. Gratitude for health. For family. For learning. Learning especially. Later, as we cleared dishes together, Brianna spoke quietly. "I was insecure," she admitted. "I thought if you stayed central, I would feel peripheral." I nodded. "Power doesn't disappear when shared," I said. "It stabilizes." She absorbed that. Growth, I've learned, often begins with discomfort. After dessert, Daniel raised his glass. "To family," he said. Then he looked at me. And to understanding what that actually means. No one mentioned the wedding. No one mentioned the trash can. But it was there, invisibly. Because beginnings leave impressions. That night, as I drove home through quiet streets lined with autumn leaves, I thought about how easily everything could have fractured. A chair replaced with a trash can. A message sent. A message returned. We could have chosen pride. We could have chosen distance. Instead, we chose clarity. The trust remained structured. The boundaries remained defined. But respect now stands where symbolism once tried to. At 71, I do not need to dominate a table. I do not need to finance belonging. I only need to know that my presence is not disposable. They replaced my seat with a trash can. Months later, they offered me a chair. But the truth is, I was never fighting for furniture. I was protecting position. And position, when grounded in dignity, does not require volume. It requires steadiness. That's where I sit now. Steady. And that is enough.